hindsight, I think I was so naive to think how quote unquote simple it would be to start a business and be successful. But it was like, oh, like this is too big of an opportunity to give up.
Hi, I'm Michael.
And I'm Landon.
And this is In Their 20s, the best podcast for people in their 20s.
Today we spoke with Jacob Sills, who is the founder and CEO of Uptrust, which is a criminal justice-focused software tool that helps defendants show up to their scheduled hearings on time, all through a text message. As a whole, Jacob is trying to solve mass incarceration. Him and his team currently work with over 100 public defender offices across the United States and have helped change the lives of over 900,000 defendants. We had a great time speaking with Jacob, who shared so much great advice on finding balance while creating a company in your 20s.
And now let's go ahead and jump in with Jacob.
So just with that, Jacob, we can get started. What we like to do and what we can do today, if you just wanted to quickly introduce yourself, first name, last name, and a quick short blurb about what Uptrust is.
Sure. I'm Jacob Sills. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Uptrust. Uptrust helps people stay out of jail that shouldn't be there. And we do that through a communication platform, which we plug into county and state level governments to help low-income individuals navigate the criminal justice system. One of the things is a bunch of people, over 1 million each year, end up in jail and prison due to a technical violation, like missing a court date or a check-in with their probation officer. And the reason why people miss these appointments is often, they had transportation issues or they forgot. And so what we do is help remind them and connect them to people that care about them and relevant social services vis-a-vis their cell phone, so they can comply at higher rates and live more successful lives and hopefully exit and never re-enter the criminal justice system.
Thank you for that, Jacob. And we are super interested to dive in and speak about Uptrust because Michael and I were very intrigued with the idea. It sounds really interesting. We love how unique it is. We've never heard of anything like this in the market. So we're excited to even start with the beginning. We did see you began your career at Bank of America Securities, did end up at grad school as well at the Wharton School of Business. Where did the pivot from, your previous job with Bank of America Securities to work in corporate America, to going to grad school, and now, running a business, Uptrust, business that you founded yourself. Where did that transition start?
Sure. So it wasn't necessarily premeditated in the sense that, when I was graduating college, it was 2006. So it was like a really heady bull market. It was before, the Great Recession. And, for me, and some of the advice that I'd gotten was like, hey, if you could work in finance or something like that, now it might not just be finance, might be tech or something like that, but like learn some skill sets. And Bank of America had like a training program and all that stuff. So I was able to get a job that, probably if I was graduating today, I would not be good enough to get because they've gotten heavily more exclusive than they were, 15 years ago. Learned a bunch of skills, realized at some point that, just doing a bunch of spreadsheet work, I'd learned a lot, but I didn't want to continue. Worked then in private equity, focused on renewable energy companies, enjoyed that, but thought there was something else and had some issues with the firm where I was at the time. And so I kind of looked at business school as an opportunity to sort of pivot and reassess. Totally not for everyone, but I really liked it. And it gave me a chance after, not taking much in the way of vacation for, 6 years or so, to sort of reflect, think about what I wanted to do. Unlike most people who started businesses after business school, I didn't go to business school to start a business. I figured I would go back into finance and I'd work at either a larger private equity firm. Towards the end of my time there, one of the things I realized was, a lot of my friends worked in private equity and at hedge funds and finance, and like a lot of the roles that were post business school, like a VP level role, like required a lot of the skills that I actually hated about my job before business school, like going through legal documents and going through detailed financial models around leverage. And I was like, this is not fun. I'm not as good as my friends at this. What I really like is like meeting with companies, being more creative. And so, one of the things for me that I thought about was like, well, you want to compete like in places where you have some kind of advantage, and I'm more, social and outgoing than some of these folks, but they're definitely probably better quantitatively than me. So maybe I'll go work at a company. So I started interviewing at companies to like work in either strategy or some kind of job within them. And around that same time, with a buddy of mine from school, we were talking about like different types of insurance products. And when I was in investment banking, I covered insurance companies, and one of them was bail bonds. And I was like, wow, bail bonds, like that seems like nothing that people at, Wharton or other sort of quote unquote fancier business schools would be looking at. So let me look at that. And I wasn't expecting to start a business, but as I kept digging into it and learning about how the system was very large, but was completely destructive to the lives of millions of low-income Americans, I was like, wow, I was kind of hooked. And as we thought we had a solution to help eliminate the use of money bail and to help local governments save money, it kind of felt like one of those, like, in hindsight, I think I was so naive to think how quote unquote simple it would be to start a business and be successful, because we're not sure if we're successful yet. It's still early in our lives, but it was like, oh, like this is too big of an opportunity to give up. And so, I think, thinking through where I was at the time, you kind of just have to look for opportunities, whether it's a role, a job, or what have you. And for me, it was like, we saw that advocates were doing an amazing job highlighting the issues in the systemic racism and structural racism that underpin the criminal legal system in our country, but people weren't building great technology tools to help dismantle these systems. And I was like, oh, this is something where I think I can be helpful. And if I've got this idea and I don't work on it at that moment, like, what am I doing with my life? It just felt that compelling.
Love that, the impact behind the idea really compelled you to get started and working on it. And, love that this came from the problem that you found and you were able to discover a solution. We'd love to also spend some time to speak about your team. Because, when launching a startup or any company, those are three really important things to consider: problem, solution, team. So when developing this software tool, did you kind of, sketch out that idea? It's going to look like this, it should look like this. But then where did you find, actual, people that you would partner with to develop an idea like this?
Sure. So, yeah, to start out, I was very much like that annoying business school student that's like, hey, I've got an idea for an app. I just need someone to help build it. Right. And I think if you look at technology companies that have been successful, they usually have a technical co-founder. Today, I think things have changed a little bit in the sense that there's different like no code software products and things like Squarespace that allow you to like, cobble together, a minimal viable product or an MVP quicker. But short of that, you really need a right team. So for me, I, sort of focused on the problem, did as much work as I could on my own, and then started talking and networking with folks to find people that would want to partner with me on this. And for that, my partner, Eli Gwynn, was a friend of a friend who had worked at the company OkCupid, one of the larger dating sites, and was thinking about different things to do. And I was like, hey, like, I know where my limitations are, but like this problem seems like it's worth solving. And Eli, was like, oh yeah, sure. And, was like, yeah, I'll work on this on a project basis with you for a little bit. And then we started doing a little work and seeing some of the impact, and that kind of snowballed. And then we kind of looked at each other and we're like, should we make this our full-time jobs? And we kind of said, yeah, sure, do it. Early on, both of us actually, before we really committed full-time, Eli was doing other sort of consulting, contractor work on the software engineering side. And myself, I was even helping a group of people on the private equity side, like buy veterinary practices. And, I think like we both looked at ourselves and like, let's stop the secondary work and let's focus on this full time.
Wow. So Jabe, you were able to create something, something so drastic that you were able to leave your personal job, which, that's something very big and something that a lot of people think about but don't necessarily do. So you finally took that last step. What would you tell a younger version of yourself? What advice would you want to bring to the table to start their own business one day?
Sure. So I think, like, to be honest, like I kind of glossed over one little step there that I think I was a mistake that I made. So I think I had this concept. I was like, oh, if I'm going to start this company, I need to be in it 100%. And depending on the type of company you start, you don't always have, 10 hours, 12 hours, 15 hours, 20 hours a day of work. You're calling people to like get feedback and understand the problem. And, when I mentioned doing some side work to help people buy veterinary practices, I actually did that like probably after like 6 months or a year, when I sat there realizing I was like, I'm not making any money. This had happened right when I was graduating business school. So it's kind of like a time when it was like, oh, it's fine to be like looking for work. But like, if I had to do it over again, I think I would have done one or two things differently. One is I would have said, I don't know enough about this problem right now. I think it's promising, but I'm going to allot, 3 hours a day to it. But from 9 to 5, I'm going to do something else. And I would have I think created some kind of job or done some contracting work to keep the lights on a little bit, until you have that confidence. At that point for me, when I went back to doing some side work, I had that confidence when I'm like, oh, I don't have enough time to do both things. And so the other thing I would say is figure out a way to structure the startup in a way that does require more time, where you're going to jump into the deep end, but you're going to figure it out right away. And for certain things, that's tougher to do. Like for us, we work with the government. The sales cycles are slow. So that's kind of tough to do, to know wow, there's conviction, because part of what you need funding. And, generally speaking, most funders aren't going to give you money unless they know you're really committed to this. So they don't want to see that you're working at, Wells Fargo, 9 to 5, and this is your side project. They're like, well, tell me when I give you money, I want you to think about this 24/7. And so the other thing is can you just jump in the deep end? And I think there you probably need more things done to get that level of confidence, which goes back to, you probably could be doing that on the side while you're working, which are things who would I work on this with? What does my customer want? All these things that as you sort of flesh out, the details, think about it almost like a mosaic. You're putting all these pieces down. And then when you take a step back, you're like, oh, I see the picture here. The missing pieces are I need to go out and sell. I need more time, or I need to hire engineers to build this feature. And at that point, you've got the confidence, but all that other work you can do on the weekends. I'm speaking to someone right now who's working on a business idea, and I'm like, have you spoken to 20 people in that line of work to understand your competitors? No? Well, you can do that on the weekends, or you can do that, during your lunch break. Have you built a proxy website? Come up with a name. All these things you can do on your own. So I think there's a lot of stuff you can do before you sort of make that plunge. Often in these stories, people forget about the earlier stuff, right? They just remember the successful stuff, or they make it seem like you just jump in there. And there's all these things you can do up there before you jump in, that I would recommend. That, to be honest, as I said, I, in hindsight, probably jumped in too soon, not having any experience doing this myself.
So, Jacob, we're going to get into the positive acclaim that Uptrust has had in a moment. Michael's going to be asking about that. So the amount of people that you've worked with, the number of lives that you've impacted, the strategic partnerships that you built. But before that, we'd like to hear about maybe a scarier moment, or something that you've noticed, while building Uptrust, that you maybe, weren't necessarily prepared for. We feel that, since there are a lot of young people right now dealing with uncertainty, we'd love to hear about that moment and how you were able to bounce back.
Sure. And by the way, this is something that I'm still working on. So everyone, whether you're 20, 30, 40, 50, till probably the day before you die, is dealing with setbacks. For me, there are two similar ones. And one has to deal with potentially working with Bernalillo County, New Mexico, which is Albuquerque. Another one is working with San Francisco public defender. And in both instances, we thought we had come to an agreement that we were going to sign a contract. And both of them were very early on. So, here I am, right, jumping into the deep end, thinking that this is my life's work. I'm going to be doing this. I'm not working in a more fancy finance job. I'm going to be spending time on this thing. And these things, the contracts got pulled after they were sort of verbally agreed with. And we were trying to raise money at the time. So I'm totally flustered, totally floored, super angst driven, because I'm if we don't have these contracts, we don't have a company. And, how to, one of the things I would do in hindsight that I now do is I'm now working on meditation. And I think one of the things, I did a meditation the other day, which really would have come in handy back then, is like, you know, a lot of sort of anxiety comes with like, you think about the worst thing that can happen. And so in these instances, I thought about, I lose this contract. We then won't raise any money. We don't get award contracts. This business goes under, right? And by the way, that means I'm a failure and I wasted my time and I'll be embarrassed and all of these things. And the actual answer is like, those things might happen, but they also might not happen. You might get another contract the next day or the next week, or you'll like, this thing will fold and then you'll find some other opportunity that'll be better. One of my good friends from business school started a company. It folded. They're now the CFO of one of the largest fintech companies. He didn't expect that to happen, but after he folded, he needed a job. He took this job, he rose up the ranks, and now he's like, the company's valued at $15 billion. So, you know, when we often, I think about all the bad things that can happen when these moments happen, and they will happen, whether you're at a job or start your own company, you don't think about the positive things that can happen as well. And I think that can help you sort of center yourself and, you know, reflect on next steps and be productive in that way. So, you know, I don't know if this is good or bad. You know, when we have big losses, like, it still bothers me, but you got to remember that there's going to be wins. And when you have wins, you can't get too high, and you just got to like let yourself have that level of like equanimity and sort of, they say, inner smoothness to just let the stuff sort of roll off your back. But no, it gets scary. And I guess the one other thing I would add about, you know, failures, right, when you're an entrepreneur is like, you know, they suck twice as hard than when you're at a big company and it's just something that happened. But when you do something good, like, it feels really good. We just had someone accept an offer to work with us and they chose us over another organization. Like, that feels so much cooler when it's an organization that you started than when you're just, you know, one of 20,000 employees. So like, all these things, there's going to be good days, bad days, and you just got to sort of move on to the next one, because it's probably not going to be as disastrous as you think it's going to be.
Really happy that you were able to touch on that, because it's really, really important, super important, not just for people trying to launch a company or a startup, but for everybody. I think that a lot of times, you know, life can be so unpredictable, but you can't wake up, you know, just immediately, you know, fearing what can happen, you know, the bad case scenario. You know, it's good to plan. So if something were to come up, you do have the, you know, strategic plan. As you mentioned in the beginning, you know, you were thinking about, okay, if this happened, then that's going to lead to this, and that's going to lead to this. But at the same time, you need to sometimes take a deep breath. I think meditation is something that a lot of people I know need to hear about, including myself. That could be something that can really be.
I had no idea about that stuff, you know, like 10, 15 years ago in my 20s. And it's funny, as I've started doing it and being more reflective on it, I'm like, holy shit, was I a mess, you know? And by the way, I still got so many things to clean up, but being able to slow yourself down and not always think about the worst thing that's going to happen. Yeah, like, you know, like, yeah, no, it's so important for everyone at different stages of your lives, whether you're in college, out of college, you know, girlfriend's breaking up with you, like, it's you think the world's ending way too often.
Yeah, so Jacob, kind of like on a different note here, so different avenue here. Uptrust currently is contracted with more than, you know, 100 public defending offices around the U.S., reaching over 900,000 defendants. And, you know, this has really impacted a lot of people around our country. What do you think the ultimate impact of Uptrust is, you know, on the community? So what's its impact on the people and, you know, the actual process?
Yeah, so you know, where we've started the organization was, you know, really focused around helping people make it to court. And I do think, you know, once you do something well, that creates other opportunities to do other things well. You can't try to, you know, one of the pieces of advice I got early on was, I was like, we're going to get people to court and connect them to rides to court and help them with childcare. And someone's like, how do you just send them a text message to start? Like, that other stuff seems pretty complicated. And I was like, well, we can do it all. And they're like, just start with one thing. And I think that was really good advice. And so for us, you know, we started by getting people to go to court. Now we've realized that a lot of folks that we help make it to court are also under some kind of governmental supervision, like in probation or parole. a lot of county jails are filled with like maybe a third of them sometimes are people who have violated their probation on a technical violation. And then, on a recidivism level of going back to prison when you're on parole, like in a lot of states, 2/3 of people will go back to prison in the next, 1 to 3 years. So one of the things we saw as we started thinking about expansion was that like the current technologies out there were much more about surveillance, like tracking where you went and at-home monitoring. And we were like, well, what we've learned on the public defender side is if you just help remind people and help humanize these very complicated processes, you get much better outcomes. And so we started with public defenders. Now we're actually launching this week with community supervision organizations in Iowa and California. And the next step for us is around like, well, how do you sort of turn the system on its head? And instead of just trying to help someone navigate this complicated system, find out what help they need that can actually have them live better lives outside of it. So, that might mean connecting low-income individuals to a challenger bank that doesn't charge them any fees, because right now, predominantly, they're using prepaid debit cards and check cashers and payday lenders that are really extracting way too much money out of folks. Think about healthcare, of how many folks need to be connected to a primary care doctor instead of ending up in the ER. Or think about employment. How do you connect people to a job? Our users have unemployment rates of around 50%. And so I think for what's next for us, it's really, going from a simple reminder from an appointment to more multifaceted reminders and organization and connection to community services and probation and parole. And then eventually, helping all low-income individuals take advantage of, better services that are out there online. So in terms of like what that means from an impact perspective, this is where it gets, really, I know I'm not to curse on this, like fucked up, which is to say that, 4.5 million people are under supervision in this country. About like 8 to 10 million people will go to jail at some point in this country. Like 70 million people in America have some type of criminal record. And so it's really, really messed up. And it is something that has immense racial disparities and immense disparities around income level. And so for us, like the impact that we're trying to have is, we're not a be all and end all of the criminal justice system. Like, as I kind of alluded to before, it is really hairy and really messed up in this country. But our view in our lane is if we can sort of avoid these technical violations, we can provide the data that's really needed for advocates and community organizers to then push for more systemic change. So for example, in Illinois, where you both are at, there's recently, part of I think the latest budget, and there's the latest bill that had like massive reforms in getting rid of the use of money bail and limiting the use of electronic monitoring. Those are the types of things that a company like ours can support, but can't change on our own. So for us, we really see ourselves playing a role in trying to help millions of people live more successfully. But it's also trying to produce the data that supports advocates in really getting to systemic change. We're not a normal company in that sense. Most of our investors are foundations. All of our employees are, work with us because they care about, the mission in criminal justice reform. But it is something that's really important to us.
Love what you're working on so much, Jacob, and we really believe it. You're a major disruptor in this field, doing amazing things. We're super excited to see, what you and your team continue to build, how Uptrust will continue to scale and impact lives. We really, really respect mission-backed companies that really, really are trying to make a difference. So we were glad we were able to speak with you today. So thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you, Jacob.
Yeah, of course. Last thing, if anybody is interested in connecting with you, to maybe, see if there are any open jobs or even speak with you further, what's the best way for people in their 20s or any members of our audience to get in touch with you?
Usually it's over email. So jacob@uptrust.co.
Perfect. Jacob, thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Right, yeah.